Welcome to my channel. Try to hear the latest story.
I stood in the corner of my grandmother's living room, watching my sister Madison pose for what had to be her 100th engagement photo of the evening. The entire family clustered around her like she was some kind of celebrity, cooing over her diamond ring and gushing about her upcoming wedding to Derek. Meanwhile, I held my glass of champagne, feeling completely invisible as usual. When my cousin finally noticed me standing there and asked what I had been up to lately, I casually mentioned that I had just bought a penthouse in Manhattan. The room went dead silent. Madison's wine glass slipped from her perfectly manicured fingers and shattered against the hardwood floor. My mother burst into tears. Then my Uncle Gary looked around at everyone's shocked faces and muttered the words that would change our family forever. Well, I guess we backed the wrong kid. Growing up in our comfortable suburban Connecticut home, Madison was treated like absolute royalty from the moment she drew her first breath. 3 years younger than me, she somehow became the center of our family's universe before she could even walk properly. My parents, Carol and David, convinced themselves early on that Madison's natural beauty and effortless charm would be the key to elevating our family's social standing in our community. I remember being 8 years old, excitedly showing my parents a science fair project I had worked on for weeks. I had built a working volcano that could erupt on command, complete with detailed explanations about chemical reactions. But that same afternoon, Madison came home from kindergarten with a finger painting of a rainbow, and suddenly all attention shifted to her artistic genius. My volcano sat forgotten on the kitchen counter, while everyone celebrated Madison's scribbled masterpiece like it belonged in the Metropolitan Museum of Art. The pattern only intensified as we got older. When Madison turned 16, our parents surprised her with a brand new BMW convertible, complete with a giant red bow in the driveway. They threw a party just to celebrate her getting her driver's license, inviting half the neighborhood to witness their precious daughter's milestone. I had to work 3 summer jobs just to scrape together enough money for a used Honda Civic with 150,000 miles on it. When I finally bought that beat-up car with my own hard-earned money, my father's only comment was that I should have chosen a more reliable brand. Family vacations became entirely focused on Madison's cheerleading competitions and social calendar. We spent summers driving across the country to various cheerleading camps and tournaments, staying in expensive hotels so Madison could compete with girls from wealthy families. I would sit in hotel lobbies reading programming books, while Madison received private coaching sessions that cost hundreds of dollars per hour. When I suggested we might visit some colleges during these trips, since I was approaching my senior year, my mother told me we could look at local community college brochures when we got home. The financial favoritism reached absurd levels during our college years. Madison chose an expensive private university based primarily on its social reputation and Greek life scene. Our parents emptied their savings account to pay for her tuition room and board sorority dues and endless spring break trips to exotic locations. She studied communications with a focus on social media, spending more time planning themed parties than attending actual classes. Meanwhile, I earned a full scholarship to study computer science at a state university, but still had to work part-time jobs to cover my living expenses and textbooks. Madison's college years were documented like a royal tour through social media posts featuring designer clothes, expensive restaurants, and luxury vacation destinations. She pledged the most exclusive sorority on campus, which required additional fees for formal events, charity galas, and sister retreats. Our parents cheerfully wrote check after check, convinced that Madison's social connections would lead to incredible career opportunities after graduation. But the most devastating revelation came during Madison's senior year of college when she was 21 years old. She convinced our parents to co-sign an enormous loan for what she described as her revolutionary photography business venture. She presented them with glossy brochures and fake business plans, claiming she had already secured several high-profile clients who would make her rich within months of launching her company. The truth was far more sinister. Madison had no photography skills beyond basic smartphone filters, no business plan beyond spending money on herself, and no clients beyond her own imagination. The loan money went directly toward funding her extravagant lifestyle designer handbags, luxury spa treatments, expensive dinners, and a convertible sports car she claimed was essential for her business image. She rented a lavish apartment in the trendy part of town and threw elaborate parties to maintain her social status among her wealthy college friends. Within 6 months, Madison's fake photography business collapsed completely. She had spent every penny of the loan money without generating a single dollar of legitimate income. When the loan payments became due, she defaulted immediately, leaving our parents legally responsible for the enormous debt. Their credit scores plummeted overnight, and they were forced to take out a second mortgage on our family home just to avoid bankruptcy. The most heartbreaking part was watching my parents try to protect Madison from the consequences of her own actions. They told family and friends that Madison's business had failed due to market conditions and unforeseen economic challenges. They never once suggested that Madison should get a job to help pay back the money she had stolen from them. Instead, they continued making excuses for her behavior while their own financial security crumbled around them. For 2 years, I watched my parents struggle with overwhelming debt, cutting back on everything from groceries to medical appointments. They aged rapidly under the stress, their marriage strained by constant arguments about money. Meanwhile, Madison moved back home and continued living like a princess, expecting our parents to support her while she figured out her next career move. She spent her days shopping, getting her nails done, and posting inspirational quotes about following your dreams on social media. What my parents never knew was that I had been quietly paying their mortgage payments for those entire 2 years. I set up automatic transfers from my business account to their bank, covering their housing costs so they wouldn't lose the family home. I never told them because I knew they would refuse help from me while continuing to enable Madison's destructive behavior. I couldn't bear to watch them become homeless because of my sister's selfishness and their own misguided priorities. While Madison was busy destroying our family's finances with her fake business schemes, I was building something real from my college dorm room. Starting in my sophomore year, I spent countless nights developing a software application that could streamline inventory management for small businesses. I survived on ramen noodles and energy drinks, coding until dawn, while my roommates partied or slept peacefully. I missed family dinners, birthday celebrations, and holiday gatherings because I was consumed with perfecting my software and building a client base. When I did manage to come home for brief visits, my parents would constantly ask why I couldn't be more social and outgoing like Madison. They worried that I was becoming too isolated and antisocial, completely missing the fact that I was building the foundation for a successful career. Madison, meanwhile, brought home a parade of boyfriends who were treated like conquering heroes by our parents. Each new relationship was celebrated like a major accomplishment, with family dinners held in honor of whatever guy she was dating that month. Derek, Jake, Brandon, Connor. They were all welcomed into our home with enthusiasm and respect, while my rare appearances were met with lectures about work-life balance and social skills. The programming work was exhausting and lonely, but it was also incredibly rewarding. I was solving real problems for real businesses, helping small companies save time and money through better technology. My client base grew slowly but steadily through word-of-mouth recommendations and positive reviews. I was making genuine contributions to the business world, while Madison was taking selfies at poolside bars in Miami. But everything changed during my senior year, when I discovered something that shattered my trust in my family forever. I was applying for a business loan to expand my software company when my application was rejected due to poor credit history. The bank representative informed me that I had multiple outstanding loans and credit card debts that were severely damaging my credit score. I had never taken out any loans or opened any credit cards beyond one student card that I paid off religiously every month. Confused and alarmed, I requested detailed credit reports from all three major agencies. What I found made me physically sick to my stomach. Madison had been using my Social Security number to open credit accounts and take out loans for years, apparently starting when I was still in high school, and had no reason to monitor my credit. She had opened 7 different credit cards in my name, maxing them out on luxury purchases before abandoning them to collections agencies. She had taken out personal loans using my information, claiming I worked at companies where I had never been employed. Most devastatingly, she had applied for a massive business loan using forged documents that showed my legitimate software company as collateral for her fake photography venture. The paperwork was sophisticated and convincing, featuring fake tax returns, fabricated bank statements, and forged financial projections that made it appear my company was far more valuable than it actually was. Madison had somehow obtained copies of my real business documents and had manipulated them to support her fraudulent loan applications. She had literally stolen my identity and my business reputation to fund her selfish lifestyle. When I confronted Madison about the identity theft, she initially denied everything, claiming I was paranoid and jealous of her success. But when I showed her printed copies of the fraudulent documents with my forged signature, she broke down and admitted what she had done. Instead of showing remorse or offering to make things right, she begged me not to tell our parents because it would ruin her relationship with Derek. I was stunned by her selfishness and complete lack of accountability. She had destroyed my credit, potentially sabotaged my business, and committed serious federal crimes. But her primary concern was maintaining her perfect image with her latest boyfriend. She promised she would pay everything back once her photography business started making money, as if her fake business venture was still somehow going to succeed. When I told our parents about Madison's identity theft and fraud, their reaction was even more devastating than her crimes. Instead of being horrified by what Madison had done to me, they immediately began making excuses for her behavior. My mother insisted that Madison had probably just made some innocent mistakes with paperwork, while my father suggested that I was being overly dramatic about what he called family financial confusion. They actually had the audacity to suggest that I should help Madison fix her financial problems instead of pursuing legal action against her. They pointed out that Madison was young and had made some poor decisions while I was successful and could afford to help my sister get back on her feet. The fact that Madison had systematically stolen from me and potentially destroyed my business was somehow less important than maintaining family harmony. Uncle Gary was the only family member who understood the severity of what Madison had done. He worked in banking and immediately recognized that identity theft and loan fraud were serious federal crimes that could result in prison sentences. But even Gary's support couldn't overcome the wall of denial and favoritism that surrounded Madison like a protective shield. The realization that my own family would choose Madison over justice, even when she had committed crimes against me, was more painful than any of the financial damage she had caused. I had spent years being treated like a second-class citizen, but discovering that they would actively protect my abuser while minimizing my victimization was the final breaking point that changed everything. Madison's identity theft and my family's betrayal became the catalyst for the most important decision of my life. I realized that I needed to become completely financially independent from my family and build wealth in ways they could never trace, manipulate, or sabotage. If they wanted to treat me like an outsider, I would use that invisibility to my advantage. The first step was rebuilding my credit through legitimate legal channels. I filed police reports documenting Madison's identity theft, disputed every fraudulent account with credit agencies, and worked with attorneys to clear my financial record. The process took nearly a year and cost thousands of dollars in legal fees, but I was determined to reclaim my financial identity from my sister's destructive choices. Simultaneously, I restructured my software company through a complex network of limited liability companies and corporate entities that would shield my assets from future family interference. I learned about business structures, tax strategies, and asset protection from books, online courses, and consultations with financial professionals. My goal was to build wealth in ways that would be completely invisible to my family's prying eyes and toxic dynamics. The software company had grown far beyond my original expectations, serving over 200 small businesses across New England with inventory management solutions. But instead of celebrating this success publicly, I quietly sold the company to a larger technology firm for $1.4 million. The sale was structured through multiple corporate entities, making it nearly impossible for anyone to trace the money back to me personally. With the proceeds from the software sale, I began investing in real estate across different markets and property types. I started small with a duplex in Boston using rental income from one unit to pay the mortgage while living in the other unit myself. The property cash flowed positively from day one, generating enough extra income to begin saving for additional investments. Over the next 3 years, I systematically acquired properties throughout New England. A small apartment building in Providence that housed college students provided steady rental income with minimal maintenance requirements. 2 commercial buildings in Philadelphia generated higher rents from business tenants who signed longer lease agreements. A portfolio of single-family homes in growing suburban markets appreciated rapidly while providing consistent monthly cash flow. Each property was purchased through different corporate entities with carefully structured financing arrangements. I used business credit lines, investor loans, and partnership agreements that kept my personal name off most public records. To anyone looking from the outside, I appeared to be living modestly in a duplex while working a regular job at a small technology company. The real estate investments were generating substantial monthly income, but I lived well below my means to maximize reinvestment opportunities. I drove a modest used car, wore clothes from discount stores, and avoided any lifestyle inflation that might attract attention from my family. They continued to view me as the struggling antisocial son who was too focused on work to enjoy life properly. But the most life-changing event occurred during my 26th year when I received a phone call from an attorney representing my great-uncle Walter. Walter was my grandmother's younger brother, a reclusive millionaire who had made his fortune through early investments in technology companies during the 1980s and 90s. Our family had always considered Walter to be eccentric and antisocial, rarely including him in family gatherings or holiday celebrations. Walter had been quietly following my business activities for years, apparently impressed by my work ethic and financial discipline. Through industry connections and public business records, he had tracked my software company's growth and my transition into real estate investing. What amazed me was that Walter understood exactly what I was building, while my own parents remained completely oblivious to my success. The inheritance Walter left me included $12 million in liquid assets, a diversified portfolio of stocks and bonds worth another $8 million, and a private equity stake in several technology companies that was valued at approximately $15 million. But more valuable than the money was Walter's letter explaining why he had chosen to leave everything to me instead of distributing it among other family members. Walter wrote that he had watched our family dynamics for decades, observing how Madison was praised for superficial qualities while my genuine accomplishments were ignored or dismissed. He recognized that I had inherited his analytical mind and work ethic, while Madison had inherited the family tendency toward entitlement and financial irresponsibility. Most importantly, he trusted that I would use the inheritance wisely rather than squandering it on luxury and status symbols. The will specifically excluded Madison, stating that Walter had observed her pattern of financial destruction and believed that any inheritance would only enable further irresponsible behavior. He had witnessed how our parents continued to bail Madison out of problems instead of allowing her to face consequences for her choices, and he refused to contribute to that destructive cycle. I never told my family about Walter's inheritance, They attended his small funeral service where the attorney simply announced that Walter's estate would be distributed according to his written instructions. No one asked me directly if I had been included in the will, and I saw no reason to volunteer information that would only create more family drama and resentment. With Walter's inheritance combined with my real estate portfolio and business profits, I had accumulated enough wealth to make truly significant investment moves. But instead of changing my lifestyle or revealing my financial position, I continued living quietly while researching my next major acquisition. I wanted to make a statement that would be impossible to ignore or dismiss something that would force my family to recognize exactly how wrong they had been about me. That's when I discovered the penthouse apartment on Central Park West that would become my Declaration of Independence. The penthouse apartment I discovered was located in one of Manhattan's most prestigious pre-war buildings directly overlooking Central Park, with unobstructed views stretching from the Metropolitan Museum to the Hudson River. Built in 1928, the building featured classic architectural details like crown-molding parquet floors and floor-to-ceiling windows that flooded every room with natural light throughout the day. The specific unit was a 4-bedroom, 3-bathroom corner apartment spanning 3,200 square feet on the building's top floor. The master suite included a walk-in closet larger than most New York studio apartments and a marble bathroom with both a soaking tub and separate glass shower. The living room featured a working fireplace and French doors that opened onto a private terrace overlooking the park's tree canopies. What made this property truly special was the building's exclusive amenities and prime location. Residents enjoyed 24-hour doorman service, a private fitness center, and a rooftop garden that provided 360-degree views of Manhattan's skyline. The building was situated within walking distance of world-class museums, fine dining restaurants, and luxury shopping on Fifth Avenue. The asking price was $4.8 million, which would normally require complex financing arrangements and lengthy approval processes through the building's co-op board. However, my inheritance from Uncle Walter allowed me to make an all-cash offer that closed within 30 days, avoiding the typical bureaucratic delays and financial scrutiny that come with luxury real estate transactions. I chose to purchase this particular property for several strategic reasons beyond its obvious beauty and prestige. First, Manhattan real estate represented a stable long-term investment that would likely appreciate significantly over time, especially in such a prime location near Central Park. Second, owning property in Manhattan would establish me as a serious player in high-level business circles, opening doors to investment opportunities and professional relationships that might otherwise be inaccessible. But most importantly, this purchase would serve as an unmistakable declaration to my family that their perception of my life and capabilities was completely wrong. A $4.8 million cash purchase could not be explained away as luck or exaggerated. It represented serious wealth and financial sophistication that would be impossible for them to ignore or diminish. I spent several weeks furnishing the apartment with carefully chosen pieces that reflected both comfort and success. The living room featured a custom-made sectional sofa in charcoal gray leather, positioned to take advantage of the park views through floor-to-ceiling windows. A dining table crafted from reclaimed walnut wood seated 8 people comfortably, perfect for business dinners or family gatherings that might actually treat me with respect. The master bedroom included a king-sized platform bed with built-in nightstands and a sitting area with 2 armchairs overlooking the park. I converted one of the spare bedrooms into a home office with built-in bookshelves, a standing desk, and high-end computer equipment for managing my real estate investments and exploring new business opportunities. The kitchen was already spectacular, featuring granite countertops, stainless steel appliances, and custom cabinetry that provided ample storage for serious cooking. I added high-quality cookware and small appliances, anticipating that I would finally have space and motivation to develop my culinary skills beyond college ramen and takeout containers. Most significantly, I used the rooftop terrace to create an outdoor entertainment space. with comfortable seating, potted plants, and string lights that created ambiance during evening gatherings. The terrace became my favorite space in the entire apartment, offering peaceful moments above the city's chaos and providing perspective on how far I had traveled from my family's dismissive treatment. The timing of my penthouse purchase coincided perfectly with grandmother Ruth's 80th birthday celebration, which my parents had been planning for months as a major family reunion. This party would bring together relatives from across the country, including cousins, aunts, and uncles who had witnessed years of favoritism toward Madison while treating me like background furniture. I decided that Ruth's birthday celebration would be the perfect venue to casually mention my recent real estate acquisition. Not to brag or show off, but simply to correct the record about my life and achievements. I was tired of being viewed as the struggling, antisocial family member who couldn't measure up to Madison's supposed success and charm. The party itself was typically focused on Madison and her recent engagement to Derek, a commercial real estate broker she had met through her latest attempt at starting a legitimate career. Derek worked for a prestigious Manhattan firm and seemed genuinely successful, unlike Madison's previous boyfriends, who were mostly focused on partying and maintaining their social media presence. Madison spent the entire evening showing off her engagement ring and describing elaborate wedding plans that would obviously cost our parents another fortune they couldn't afford. She posed for countless photos, accepted congratulations from every family member, and basked in the familiar spotlight of being the family's golden child. Meanwhile, I stood quietly in corners nursing a glass of champagne and observing family dynamics that had remained unchanged for decades. Cousins asked polite questions about my work before quickly shifting conversations back to Madison's engagement excitement. Aunts and uncles offered generic encouragement about my career prospects while clearly viewing me as the less impressive sibling. But when my cousin Jennifer finally asked me directly what I had been up to lately, something in her tone suggested genuine interest rather than polite obligation. Perhaps she had grown tired of hearing exclusively about Madison's superficial accomplishments, or maybe she sensed that there was more to my story than the family narrative suggested. So I answered her question with complete honesty and refreshing simplicity. I just bought a penthouse apartment on Central Park West. The words came out naturally without dramatic emphasis or attention-seeking energy. I was simply sharing a factual update about my recent activities, the same way someone might mention taking a vacation or changing jobs. The immediate silence that followed was profound and telling. The wine glass slipping from Madison's fingers created a sharp crash that seemed to echo through Grandmother Ruth's suddenly silent living room. Red wine splattered across the hardwood floor in abstract patterns, while everyone stared at me like I had just announced I was moving to Mars. The engagement photos Madison had been posing for moments earlier were forgotten as the entire family processed what I had just said. Derek Madison's fiancé, who worked in Manhattan commercial real estate, was the first person to break the stunned silence. His face went completely pale as he processed the address I had mentioned, clearly recognizing both the building and the astronomical value of penthouses in that area. Working in high-end Manhattan, real estate meant Derek understood exactly what kind of money was required to purchase property on Central Park West. "Wait," Derek said slowly, his voice carrying a mixture of disbelief and dawning realization. "Did you say Central Park West? Like actually Central Park West?" When I nodded casually, Derek's expression shifted from confusion to something approaching panic. He had been dating Madison for 8 months, during which she had repeatedly described her family's financial struggles and portrayed me as her unsuccessful antisocial brother, who barely managed to pay his bills. Madison immediately began damage control, forcing a laugh and suggesting that I was obviously joking or exaggerating about the penthouse purchase. She told Derek that I had always been prone to telling elaborate stories to get attention, especially when she was receiving praise or recognition from the family. Her voice carried a sharp edge of desperation as she tried to convince everyone that my statement was some kind of misguided attempt at humor. But Derek was not laughing. His professional knowledge of Manhattan real estate made it impossible for him to dismiss my claim as a harmless exaggeration. Penthouses on Central Park West represented serious wealth, the kind of money that came from significant business success or substantial inheritance. If Madison's supposedly struggling brother could afford such property, then everything Madison had told him about her family's financial situation was potentially false. My mother's tears were not tears of joy or pride in my success. Instead, Carol was crying from what appeared to be panic and overwhelming confusion. For years, she had convinced herself that Madison was the family's best hope for financial security and social advancement, while viewing me as a disappointment who would probably need their help throughout my adult life. The possibility that I had achieved significant wealth without their knowledge or support was threatening her fundamental understanding of our family dynamics. My father David stood frozen near the fireplace, his face cycling through expressions of disbelief, confusion, and what looked like growing anger. He demanded to see proof of my supposed penthouse purchase, clearly doubting that I could have acquired such valuable property without his knowledge. David had always prided himself on understanding money and business, so the idea that his son had achieved major financial success while flying completely under his radar was deeply unsettling to his ego. The other family members began whispering among themselves, trying to make sense of this unexpected revelation. Cousins who had always viewed me as the family's underachiever were suddenly reconsidering years of assumptions about my life and career prospects. Aunts and uncles who had focused all their attention on Madison's superficial accomplishments were beginning to realize they might have been overlooking something significant about my activities. But it was Uncle Gary who delivered the most devastating and honest assessment of the situation. Gary had always been the family's truth teller, willing to say what everyone else was thinking, but afraid to voice publicly. He looked around at the shocked faces, took in Madison's desperate attempts to discredit my statement, observed my parents' obvious panic, and shook his head with a mixture of recognition and regret. "Well," Uncle Gary said with characteristic directness, "I guess we backed the wrong kid." His words cut through the room's tension like a knife, stating what was becoming obvious to everyone present. The family had invested all their emotional energy, financial resources, and social capital in Madison's supposed potential, while treating me like an afterthought who would never amount to anything significant. Gary's comment revealed the calculated nature of my parents' favoritism. This wasn't just about natural preference or personality differences between Madison and me. Instead, it exposed that Carol and David had made deliberate choices about which child to support and promote, viewing their parenting strategy as an investment that would eventually pay dividends through improved family status and financial security. Madison's face turned bright red with embarrassment and anger as she realized that Uncle Gary had just articulated what everyone was beginning to understand. Her entire identity was built around being the family's golden child, the successful daughter who would elevate everyone's social standing through her beauty charm and advantageous relationships. If I had actually achieved greater success than she had then, her role as the family favorite was suddenly meaningless. Derek pulled Madison aside for what appeared to be an intense private conversation near the kitchen doorway. Even from across the room, I could see that he was asking her pointed questions about her previous descriptions of my financial situation. Madison's body language suggested she was struggling to explain the discrepancy between her portrayal of me as a struggling failure and the reality that I had apparently purchased luxury Manhattan real estate. Grandmother Ruth, the guest of honor whose 80th birthday we were supposedly celebrating, had been watching this entire drama unfold with growing concern and interest. Ruth had always been more perceptive than the rest of the family, often noticing details and patterns that others missed or ignored. She approached me directly while everyone else was still processing the shock of my announcement. "Thomas," Ruth said quietly, "is it true? Do you really own a penthouse in Manhattan?" When I confirmed that yes, I had recently purchased the property, Ruth's expression shifted from curiosity to what looked like deep sadness. She seemed to be realizing that her own family had been systematically mistreating and undervaluing one of her grandchildren for years. But Uncle Gary wasn't finished revealing uncomfortable truths about our family's dynamics. He looked directly at my parents and continued his brutal honesty with another devastating observation. "You know what the really pathetic part is? You two have been planning to ask Thomas for money to bail you out of Madison's mess. And now you find out he's been successful this whole time while you've been treating him like garbage." Gary's revelation hit my parents like a physical blow, confirming that their favoritism toward Madison had been even more calculated and selfish than I had realized. They weren't just guilty of unfair treatment. They had actively planned to exploit my success while continuing to prioritize Madison's needs and wants over my feelings and dignity. The room fell into another uncomfortable silence as everyone absorbed the full implications of what Uncle Gary had exposed about my parents' motivations and the family's toxic dynamics that had shaped our relationships for decades. Uncle Gary's brutal honesty about my parents' hidden agenda opened the floodgates for years of suppressed frustration and anger that I had been carrying alone. Standing in my grandmother's living room, surrounded by family members who were finally seeing our dysfunctional dynamics clearly, I decided it was time to tell the complete truth about how I had been treated throughout my entire life. "You want to know what's really pathetic?" I said, my voice steady but filled with decades of accumulated pain. "I've been paying Mom and Dad's mortgage for the past 2 years because Madison's fake business destroyed their credit and left them facing foreclosure. But instead of thanking me or acknowledging what I was doing, they kept treating me like I was the family disappointment while praising Madison for her entrepreneurial spirit." The shock on my parents' faces was immediate and profound. They had no idea that I had been secretly preventing them from losing their home, covering their housing costs, while they continued to enable Madison's destructive behavior and treat me like a second-class citizen. The realization that I had been supporting them financially while they planned to ask me for money was almost too painful for them to process. I continued, my voice growing stronger as years of suppressed emotions finally found their outlet. "Do you remember when I won the state science fair in 8th grade? Madison had a cheerleading practice that same day, so nobody came to the awards ceremony. I stood on that stage alone while other kids' families cheered for them. And when I got home with my trophy, Dad asked me to keep it quiet because Madison was upset about some drama with her squad." Cousin Jennifer gasped quietly, apparently remembering that day, and realizing for the first time how cruel the family's priorities had been. Other relatives began shifting uncomfortably as they recalled similar incidents where my accomplishments had been overshadowed or ignored in favor of Madison's activities. When I got a full scholarship to college, Mom's first comment was worry that I would become too proud and forget about family values. But when Madison got into her expensive private school with mediocre grades, you threw a party and invited the whole neighborhood to celebrate her achievement. I worked 3 jobs to pay for my living expenses while Madison got unlimited spending money for sorority events and spring break trips. Derek was listening to every word with growing concern, clearly recognizing that Madison's portrayal of our family dynamics had been completely dishonest. He was learning that the woman he planned to marry had grown up as a spoiled princess who had never faced real consequences for her actions, while her brother had been systematically neglected despite achieving genuine success through hard work and determination. The identity theft was just the final confirmation of how little you actually care about me. I continued looking directly at my parents. Madison stole my social security number, opened fraudulent accounts, took out loans using my business as collateral, and nearly destroyed my credit. When I told you what she had done, your immediate response was to ask me to help fix her problems instead of demanding that she face consequences for committing federal crimes against her own brother. My mother, Carol, started to interrupt with what sounded like another excuse for Madison's behavior, but I held up my hand and kept talking. The time for protecting everyone's feelings was over, and I was determined to say everything I had been holding inside for years. Madison has never had a real job, never paid her own bills, never faced a single consequence for any of her destructive choices. She's 25 years old and still lives at home, expecting you to support her while she pretends to build another fake business. Meanwhile, I've been working since I was 14, built and sold a successful company, invested in real estate across 3 states, and accumulated enough wealth to buy luxury properties with cash. But somehow, I'm still viewed as the family failure who needs guidance and criticism. Uncle Gary nodded approvingly as I spoke, clearly satisfied that someone was finally articulating the obvious problems with our family's treatment of Madison versus their treatment of me. Other relatives were beginning to look uncomfortable as they realized their own complicity in perpetuating these unfair dynamics through years of focusing attention and praise exclusively on Madison. Grandmother Ruth was listening with what appeared to be growing horror as she understood the full extent of how her own family had been treating one of her grandchildren. Ruth had always prided herself on fairness and treating people according to their character rather than superficial qualities, but she was realizing that she had failed to protect me from years of systematic emotional abuse and neglect. The most heartbreaking part, I said, my voice beginning to crack with emotion, is that I kept believing you might eventually see me clearly and treat me with basic respect. I kept hoping that my accomplishments would eventually matter enough to earn equal treatment with Madison. But you've made it clear that nothing I achieve will ever be as important as maintaining Madison's comfort and protecting her from reality. Derek had pulled Madison further into the kitchen for what appeared to be an increasingly heated discussion about her dishonesty regarding our family's financial situation and her own character. From their body language, it was obvious that Derek was questioning everything Madison had told him about her background and values. But I wasn't finished revealing the full truth about our family's dysfunction and Madison's criminal behavior. Looking around at relatives who were finally paying attention to my perspective, I delivered the news that would change everything permanently. Here's something else you should all know, I said, my voice now completely steady and determined. I've been working with federal attorneys for the past 6 months to pursue criminal charges against Madison for identity theft and financial fraud. These aren't family disagreements or misunderstandings. Madison committed serious federal crimes that carry potential prison sentences of up to 15 years. The silence that followed was deafening. Madison stopped arguing with Derek and turned to stare at me with obvious terror, finally understanding that her actions had consequences beyond family disappointment. My parents looked like they had been physically struck, realizing that their golden child was facing potential federal prosecution for crimes they had been minimizing and excusing. Madison has 30 days to arrange full restitution for all financial damages caused by her identity theft, including legal fees, credit repair costs, and lost business opportunities. If she fails to meet that deadline, the federal prosecutors will file criminal charges that could result in felony convictions and significant prison time. Her crimes aren't family drama anymore. They're federal cases with permanent consequences. Uncle Gary actually smiled at this revelation, clearly pleased that someone was finally holding Madison accountable for her destructive behavior. But the rest of the family looked stunned and frightened as they absorbed the reality that their perfect princess was potentially heading to federal prison for stealing from her own brother. The birthday party that was supposed to celebrate Grandmother Ruth's 80th year had become a complete revelation of our family's toxic dynamics and Madison's criminal behavior. But for the first time in my life, I felt like my voice was being heard, and my perspective was being taken seriously by people who had ignored me for decades. 6 months after Grandmother Ruth's explosive 80th birthday party, our family looked completely different than it had for the previous 2 decades. The truth about Madison's crimes and our parents' calculated favoritism had forced everyone to confront realities they had been avoiding and denying for years. Madison faced with potential federal prosecution, and the collapse of her engagement to Derek finally began taking responsibility for her actions in ways that shocked everyone who knew her. The threat of 15 years in federal prison proved to be the wake-up call that years of family enabling had failed to provide. She enrolled in financial counseling classes, found her first legitimate full-time job working as a receptionist at a dental office, and began making monthly restitution payments to cover the damages from her identity theft. The transformation wasn't immediate or easy. Madison struggled with the reality of earning minimum wage after years of living off other people's money without consequences. She had to learn basic life skills, like budgeting, time management, and professional behavior that most people develop during their teenage years. But facing the possibility of prison time motivated her to change in ways that family lectures and guilt trips never could. Derek ended their engagement within a week of the birthday party revelation, explaining that he could not marry someone who had built their entire relationship on lies about her character and family background. Madison's attempts to convince him that she was a victim of family dysfunction fell flat when Derek realized she had systematically deceived him about everything from her work history to her brother's supposed failures. The loss of Derek was devastating for Madison, but it also removed her primary motivation for maintaining her fake, perfect image. Without a wealthy fiancé to impress, Madison could no longer justify her expensive lifestyle or continued dependence on our parents. She was forced to confront the reality that her beauty and charm were worthless without genuine character and work ethic to support them. Our parents, Carol and David, underwent their own painful transformation. After Uncle Gary's revelations about their calculated investment strategy backfiring spectacularly, they enrolled in family therapy sessions where they had to confront their decades of unfair treatment and acknowledge how their favoritism had damaged both of their children in different ways. The therapy sessions were brutally honest and emotionally difficult for everyone involved. Carol had to admit that she had viewed her children as investments rather than individuals deserving of equal love and support. David was forced to recognize that his pride in Madison's superficial accomplishments had been based on ego rather than genuine parental appreciation for her character development. Most importantly, they both had to acknowledge that their treatment of me had been cruel and damaging regardless of their intentions or motivations. Learning that I had been secretly paying their mortgage while they planned to ask me for money was a humbling experience that forced them to reevaluate their understanding of both of their children's true natures. The family therapy also revealed that my parents' favoritism toward Madison had been driven partly by their own insecurities about social status and financial security. They had convinced themselves that Madison's beauty and charm would attract wealthy partners who could elevate the entire family's circumstances while viewing my technical skills and work ethic as less valuable for achieving social advancement. Grandmother Ruth, horrified by what she had learned about our family dynamics during her birthday party, took decisive action to address years of unfairness and favoritism. She revised her will to reflect each grandchild's actual character and contributions rather than continuing patterns of unequal treatment based on superficial qualities. But Ruth went beyond simply adjusting inheritance distributions. She established a family foundation focused on financial literacy education, with me as the foundation's director and primary decision-maker. The foundation would provide resources to help young people develop healthy relationships with money and avoid the destructive patterns that had nearly ruined our family. Ruth also began hosting monthly family dinners, where she enforced equal treatment and respect for all family members, refusing to allow conversations that focused exclusively on one person's activities while ignoring others. These dinners became opportunities for honest communication and relationship repair that had been impossible under the previous toxic dynamics. Uncle Gary became an important ally in rebuilding healthy family relationships, using his characteristic directness to call out favoritism or unfair treatment whenever it emerged in family gatherings. His willingness to speak uncomfortable truths helped prevent the family from sliding back into old patterns of enabling and denial. The most personally meaningful change in my life came through my relationship with Sarah Chen, a fellow real estate investor I met through professional networking events in Manhattan. Unlike Madison's relationships based on deception and image management, my connection with Sarah was built on mutual respect, shared values, and genuine compatibility. Sarah had built her own successful property investment portfolio through careful research, strategic planning, and disciplined execution. She understood the satisfaction of achieving financial independence through hard work, rather than depending on other people's money or making excuses for poor decisions. Our conversations about business strategy, market analysis, and long-term planning were intellectually stimulating in ways I had never experienced with family members who viewed my interests as boring or antisocial. More importantly, Sarah appreciated my character qualities that my family had always dismissed or criticized. She valued my analytical thinking, attention to detail, and commitment to ethical business practices. Instead of viewing my focus and discipline as antisocial behaviors, Sarah recognized them as strengths that contributed to my success and reliability as a partner. When I introduced Sarah to my family during one of Grandmother Ruth's monthly dinners, the difference in their treatment was remarkable compared to their historical behavior toward my relationships. They asked thoughtful questions about Sarah's background and interests, included her in conversations naturally, and treated her with the respect they had always automatically given to Madison's boyfriends. Sarah's presence also helped my family see me through fresh eyes as someone who was interesting and successful enough to attract an accomplished, intelligent woman who had chosen to be with me based on genuine compatibility rather than desperation or convenience. Watching Sarah laugh at my jokes and engage with my perspectives helped my family recognize qualities in me they had been overlooking for years. The penthouse apartment became a symbol of transformation for our entire family, representing not just my financial success, but also the possibility of honest relationships based on respect rather than manipulation. When I hosted Christmas dinner in my Manhattan home, everyone could see tangible evidence that treating me fairly had always been the right choice, even when they had chosen differently. Madison's attendance at that Christmas dinner was particularly meaningful because it represented her acknowledgement that I deserved respect and recognition for my achievements. She apologized publicly for the identity theft and admitted that her jealousy and entitlement had driven her to hurt someone who had never done anything to deserve such treatment. But perhaps the most satisfying aspect of our family's transformation was watching Madison develop genuine self-respect through her own hard work and personal growth. Instead of defining herself through other people's approval or financial support, Madison began building confidence through her own accomplishments and character development. Her job at the dental office led to opportunities for additional training and responsibility, eventually resulting in a promotion to office manager with a modest but respectable salary. Madison discovered that earning her own money through honest work was more satisfying than spending other people's money on temporary luxuries that never provided lasting fulfillment. The restitution payments Madison made to cover my identity theft damages were small individually, but they represented something much more valuable than money. Each monthly payment was evidence of Madison's commitment to taking responsibility for her actions and rebuilding trust through consistent behavior rather than empty promises or emotional manipulation. As I reflect on this incredible journey from family scapegoat to respected success story, I recognize that standing up for myself at Grandmother Ruth's birthday party was the turning point that saved our entire family from continuing down a destructive path. My willingness to speak truth about our dysfunction forced everyone to confront realities they had been avoiding for decades. The penthouse apartment was never really about proving my worth to people who had failed to recognize it. Instead, it became a symbol of self-respect and independence that allowed me to build relationships based on mutual appreciation rather than desperate attempts to earn approval from people who were determined to withhold it. Today, our family gatherings are genuinely enjoyable experiences where everyone's contributions are valued and respected. Madison continues working hard to rebuild her character and financial stability, while my parents have learned to appreciate both of their children for their unique qualities and genuine accomplishments. Most importantly, I've learned that you can't control how other people choose to treat you, but you can always control how you respond to their treatment. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for dysfunctional family members is to refuse to enable their destructive behaviors by establishing firm boundaries and demanding basic respect. The little boy who stood alone at his science fair award ceremony finally got the recognition and appreciation he always deserved. But more importantly, he learned that his own opinion of his worth was the only one that truly mattered, and that self-respect was the foundation for building all other healthy relationships in life. Have you ever had to stand up to family members who consistently undervalued your contributions while favoring someone else? How did you find the courage to demand the respect you deserved? And what changes did you see in your relationships afterward? I'd love to hear your own stories about overcoming family favoritism and building healthier dynamics based on mutual respect rather than manipulation or enabling. Thank you for listening to my story about transformation justice and the power of refusing to accept unfair treatment from people who claim to love you. I hope my experience inspires you to value your own worth and build relationships that celebrate your genuine qualities rather than dismissing them. Remember that you deserve to be seen clearly and appreciated fully for who you really are, not who other people want you to be. If this story resonated with you or reminded you of your own experiences with family dynamics, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe for more real-life stories about overcoming challenges and building better relationships, and share this content with anyone who might benefit from hearing about the importance of self-advocacy and family accountability. Your support helps me continue sharing these meaningful stories that remind us all about the power of courage, truth, and genuine transformation.